Blood pooled on the cold asphalt as the rain washed away my last breath. Standing over me weren't strangers, but my 6 sisters and the woman I was supposed to marry. They clung to Trent, the imposter who stole my name, my fortune, and my family. I spent my whole life begging for their approval, only to be discarded like trash when a fake DNA test surfaced. As my vision faded to black, I made a silent vow to whatever gods were listening. If I ever got another chance, I would burn their perfect world to the ground. Then my eyes snapped open. The agonizing crunch of my own ribs, shattering against the grille of the black SUV, was a sound that would echo in my mind for eternity. It was November 14th, the night of the annual Davenport Charity Gala at the St. Regis in New York. I wasn't invited, of course. For the past 3 years, ever since the truth came out, I had been the family's dirty secret, the hospital mix-up, the parasite who had unknowingly leached off the Davenport wealth while the real son, Trent, suffered in middle-class obscurity. I lay in the filthy alleyway behind the hotel, the icy rain soaking through my threadbare coat. I had come here to confront Trent. I had spent 2 agonizing years digging, scraping together every penny I had left, from working graveyard shifts at a warehouse to hire a private investigator, a man named Thomas Gale. Gale had found the undeniable proof. The DNA test that stripped me of my family was forged. Trent had paid off a technician at the clinic. He wasn't a Davenport, he was a con artist. But Trent was always one step ahead. Footsteps echoed in the alley. The heavy oak door of the hotel's rear exit swung open, spilling golden, warm light into the miserable darkness. Out stepped Trent, impeccably dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, and clinging to his arm was Stella. Stella, my fiancée. The woman who had sworn to love me unconditionally, who had kissed my cheek and told me that wealth didn't matter, only to break off our engagement the very day my father stripped me of my inheritance. Now, she was wearing the 3-carat diamond ring I had bought her only now. It was a symbol of her impending marriage to Trent. Behind them emerged my sisters, all 6 of them. Emma, the eldest, who had practically raised me when our mother passed away. Mia and Lily, the twins, who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms. Abigail, the fierce corporate shark who taught me how to read financial reports. Natalie, the artist whose first painting I bought. And Sophia, the youngest, the sweet girl who used to ride on my shoulders. "Oh my God, is he dead?" Sophia gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. But there was no horror in her eyes, only mild disgust, as if she had just spotted a dead rat. "Don't look, sweetie," Emma said, shielding Sophia's eyes and glaring down at my broken body. Asher always was dramatic, coming here tonight trying to ruin Trent's big moment. It's pathetic. I tried to speak, but only blood bubbled past my lips. "He's lying," I wanted to scream. "I have the files. He's not your brother." Trent stepped forward, the crisp sole of his Italian leather shoe coming to rest mere inches from my face. He crouched down, a smirk playing on his lips that none of my sisters could see from their angle. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you, Asher?" Trent whispered, his voice dripping with venom. "You had to go digging. I told you to stay in the gutter where you belong." "Trent, darling, let's go back inside," Stella said, tugging gently at his sleeve. She looked down at me, her eyes flat and devoid of the warmth I had drowned in for 4 years. "The police will handle this. It was just a hit and run. He shouldn't have been standing in the delivery lane. A hit and run. It wasn't an accident. Trent's driver had waited for me." "You're right, my love," Trent said, standing up and wrapping an arm around Stella's waist. He looked at my sisters. "I'm so sorry you all had to see this. I know he lived with you for 22 years. I know it must hurt." "He was an imposter, Trent," Abigail said coldly, adjusting her designer shawl. "He stole 22 years of your life. Good riddance. Come on, the champagne is getting warm." One by one, they turned their backs on me. They laughed as they walked back into the warmth and the light, the heavy steel door slamming shut, plunging me back into the cold, rainy dark. I lay there feeling the life drain from my veins. The files proving my innocence, proving Trent's guilt, were tucked inside my jacket, soaked in my own blood. I had sacrificed everything for them. I had loved them with every fiber of my being, and they had watched me die without shedding a single tear. A searing, blinding rage ignited in my chest, burning hotter than the physical agony ripping through my body. If I could just go back, I thought, my vision narrowing into a dark tunnel. If I could just have one more chance. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't cry. I would destroy them all. The rain stopped feeling cold. The pain vanished. And then there was only blackness. Asher, are you even listening to me? My eyes snapped open. I gasped, sucking in a lungful of crisp, dry air. I wasn't in the alley. The smell of rain and blood was gone, replaced by the scent of expensive lavender polish and fresh lilies. I blinked, my vision adjusting to the blinding sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was sitting on a plush, white leather sofa. Across from me sat a man I hadn't seen alive in 3 years, my father, Ryland Davenport. Standing next to him, looking sheepish but with a hidden glint of predatory triumph in his eyes, was Trent. Surrounding us were my 6 sisters, their faces etched with a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning realization. And standing right beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder, was Stella. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked down at my hands. There was no blood, no shattered bones. I was wearing my favorite navy blue tailored suit. I glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner of the Grand Davenport living room. April 14th, 2021, the day of revelation, the day my father brought Trent home, the day I was cast out. I had actually done it. I had died in that alley in 2024, and I had woken up exactly 3 years in the past. The universe, in all its chaotic glory, had answered my dying prayer. I said, my father boomed, slamming a thick manila folder onto the glass coffee table. The DNA results are conclusive. There was a mix-up at Cedars-Sinai 22 years ago. Trent is my biological son. You, Asher, are not. In my previous life, this was the moment my world ended. I had fallen to my knees, I had cried, I had begged my father to tell me it was a joke. I had looked to my sisters for support, only to watch them slowly pull away, their eyes turning from familial warmth to suspicion and eventually cold detachment. I had clung to Stella, who promised me we would get through it, only to abandon me a month later. I looked at them now. Emma, with her arms crossed, already looking at me like a stranger. Sophia, peering at Trent with wide, curious eyes. Stella, whose hand on my shoulder suddenly felt less like a comfort and more like a heavy, suffocating weight. A slow, dark smile spread across my face. I couldn't help it. A low chuckle escaped my throat, breaking the heavy, dramatic silence of the room. "Asher?" Stella whispered, sounding unnerved. "Are you laughing? Your father just told you you're not family." I stood up, brushing off my suit jacket as if dusting off a minor inconvenience. I looked directly into my father's eyes, then at Trent. The imposter flinched slightly under my gaze. He was expecting tears. He was expecting a fight. "I heard him perfectly, Stella," I said, my voice calm, steady, and devoid of the panic that had choked me in my first life. I reached down, picked up the manila folder, and flipped it open. I pretended to scan the forged medical jargon, nodding slowly. "Well, the science doesn't lie, does it?" "Asher, I know this is a shock," my father said, his tone softening just a fraction, playing the part of the benevolent patriarch. "We will, of course, provide you with a modest severance, a sum to help you get on your feet. But as of today, Trent will be assuming his rightful place as the heir to the Davenport fortune." "Of course," I replied smoothly. I tossed the folder back onto the table. "It's only fair." My sisters exchanged bewildered glances. You're just accepting this?" Abigail, the sharpest of the 6, narrowed her eyes. "Just like that? You're not going to contest it?" "Why would I?" I asked, looking at Abigail with a cool detachment that made her visibly uncomfortable. If Trent is the blood heir, then this house, this wealth, belongs to him. I wouldn't dream of overstaying my welcome. I turned to Stella. She looked pale, her mind undoubtedly calculating how quickly she could detach herself from a penniless man without ruining her social standing. "Stella," I said softly. "Asher, we can talk about this later," she whispered quickly, glancing nervously at my father and Trent. "No need," I said. I reached for my left hand and slid off the platinum engagement band she had given me, while simultaneously reaching out to take her left hand. Before she could protest, I slid the 3-carat diamond ring off her finger. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her face flushing red. "Saving you the trouble," I replied loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "You're a woman of expensive taste, Stella, and as of 5 minutes ago, I am unemployed and disinherited. We both know this relationship just lost its return on investment." I tossed the diamond ring onto the coffee table next to the fake DNA results. It landed with a sharp clink. "Asher, how dare you speak to her like that?" Emma scolded, stepping forward defensively. "Stella has been nothing but loyal to you." "Loyalty," I mused, looking at my oldest sister. "A fascinating concept, Emma. We'll see how long yours lasts." I didn't wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked toward the grand staircase. "Where are you going?" my father demanded. To pack, I called over my shoulder without stopping. "I'll be out of your house in 15 minutes. Enjoy your new brother, ladies." I took exactly 15 minutes. I didn't pack the Rolexes, the custom suits bought with Davenport money, or the keys to the Porsche. I packed 2 pairs of jeans, a few plain shirts, my laptop, and my passport. I shoved it all into a faded canvas duffel bag I had owned since college. As I walked back down the stairs, they were all still gathered in the foyer, watching me like I was a wild animal that had suddenly gone rabid. Trent was standing in the center of them, soaking up their protective attention. I walked straight to the heavy mahogany front door. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. As I stepped out into the bright April sunshine, the heavy door clicked shut behind me, severing my ties to the Davenport name forever. I had nothing but a duffel bag and a few $100s in my checking account. But I also had something far more valuable. I knew the future. I knew every stock that would surge, every business deal my father would botch, and every dark secret the Davenports were hiding. They thought they had discarded a burden. They didn't realize they had just unleashed their executioner. Survival first, vengeance second. I checked into a cheap motel in Queens, a far cry from the silk sheets of the Davenport estate. Sitting on the lumpy mattress, I opened my laptop. I had 3 years to orchestrate the downfall of a billion-dollar empire. But knowing the future wasn't enough. I needed capital, and I needed power. My eyes landed on a headline from a financial news site. Vanguard Industries CEO faces board mutiny over succession clause. Sloan Carmichael. Sloan was the 32-year-old CEO of Vanguard, the Davenport's most vicious competitor in the tech and real estate sectors. She was brilliant, ruthless, and famously icy. But according to the news and my memories from my past life, she had a massive vulnerability. Her late grandfather's will stipulated that she must be married by her 33rd birthday to retain her majority voting shares in the company. The board, composed of old, greedy men who hated taking orders from a young woman, was stalling her every move, waiting for her birthday in 2 weeks to oust her. In my previous life, she ended up marrying some spineless European aristocrat who turned out to be an embezzler, nearly ruining her company. I closed my laptop. I had my target. 2 days later, it was pouring rain. I stood beneath a black umbrella across from the Oak Room at the Plaza Hotel. I knew Sloan held her private power lunches here every Thursday. I watched as her sleek black Maybach pulled up. Her security detail stepped out first, followed by Sloan. She was breathtaking, but terrifying. Dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back into a severe knot, her piercing blue eyes scanned the street like a hawk looking for prey. I tossed my umbrella into a trash can, stepped out into the rain, and walked directly toward her. "Hey, stop right there," her lead bodyguard barked, stepping into my path and placing a massive hand on my chest. "I need 2 minutes with Miss Carmichael," I said loudly over the rain, not breaking eye contact with her. Sloane paused at the entrance, turning to look at me. Her expression was unreadable. "I don't do street pitches. Get rid of him, David." "Miss Carmichael," I shouted as she turned away. "I know about the Horizon Tech acquisition. I know it's a trap." Sloane froze. Slowly, she turned back around. The Horizon Tech deal was highly classified. It was a massive merger Vanguard was planning to announce next month. What nobody knew except me, from my past life, was that Horizon's core patents were currently being secretly litigated by a Chinese firm, rendering them worthless. If Vanguard bought them, it would be a billion-dollar mistake. She stared at me for a long, calculating moment. "David, pat him down," she ordered. "If he's clean, bring him to my table. He has exactly 2 minutes." Inside the lavish oak room, the air smelled of truffles and old money. I sat across from Sloane in a secluded leather booth. She didn't offer me a drink. "You're Ryland Davenport's disgraced bastard," she said smoothly, leaning back and resting her chin on her steepled fingers. "Asher, isn't it? I read about your spectacular fall from grace in the tabloids yesterday. Why is the Davenport reject trying to warn me about my own business deals?" "Because the Davenports are going to buy Horizon if you back out," I lied smoothly. In reality, they wouldn't, but I needed her to believe we had a common enemy. And because I have a proposition for you. "A proposition from a man who currently owns nothing but a wetsuit," she noted, her eyes flicking up and down my damp clothes. "I own information," I corrected her. "I know the Davenport empire from the inside out. I know their shell companies, their offshore accounts, and every weakness in their supply chain." "You want to crush them, Sloane. I can give you the blueprint." She raised an eyebrow. "And what do you want in return? A job? A handout?" "I want a partnership," I said, leaning in closer. "And I want to solve your board problem." Sloane's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Careful, Asher. Your 33rd birthday is in 12 days, I stated, ignoring her warning. "The board is ready to strike. You need a husband, not a real one, obviously. You need someone who understands the corporate world, someone who can play the part convincingly for the press, and most importantly, someone who has absolutely zero claim to your assets and is willing to sign the most ironclad prenuptial agreement your lawyers can draft." Silence stretched between us. The only sound was the clinking of silverware from the surrounding tables. "You want me to marry you," she finally said, the corners of her lips twitching in amusement. "You have lost your mind." "I am offering you a mutually beneficial transaction," I countered. "You get a loyal, competent husband who secures your empire and gets the board off your back. I get access to your resources, your capital, and your protection, so I can systematically destroy the family that threw me to the wolves. A marriage of convenience, strictly business." Sloane picked up her crystal water glass, took a slow sip, and set it down. Her icy blue eyes bore into mine, searching for a crack, a lie, a hint of weakness. I gave her none. I had died already. There was nothing she could do to me that was worse than what I had already survived. "You really hate them, don't you?" she asked softly. "More than you can possibly imagine," I replied. A slow, terrifying, and absolutely beautiful smile spread across Sloane Carmichael's face. "My lawyers will have the prenup ready by tomorrow morning," she said, extending her hand across the table. "Welcome to Vanguard, Asher. Let's go burn down your family's empire." Signing the marriage certificate felt less like a romantic milestone and more like loading a sniper rifle. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 10 days after my unceremonious exile from the Davenport estate. City Hall was practically empty, save for a board clerk and Sloane's elite legal team. Sloane wore a razor-sharp ivory-white blazer and matching trousers that screamed power, her dark hair pulled back flawlessly. I wore the same tailored navy suit I had been kicked out in, though freshly dry-cleaned thanks to a small advance from my new wife. "Do you take this man?" the clerk mumbled, barely looking up from his paperwork. "I do," Sloane said, her voice crisp and entirely devoid of emotion. It was the same tone she used to close a corporate merger. "And do you take this woman?" "I do," I replied, my signature already drying on a 50-page prenuptial agreement that ensured I walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back if I ever betrayed her. But betrayal wasn't on my agenda. Destruction was. The moment we walked down the marble steps of the municipal building, the trap was sprung. Sloane's ruthless publicist, a woman named Fiona, had meticulously leaked the details to the press. Within an hour, every major financial network and social media platform was exploding with the same headline. Vanguard CEO Sloane Carmichael weds Asher Davenport in shocking secret ceremony. Back in Sloane's sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, we watched the chaos unfold on a massive flat-screen TV. I poured us both a glass of 20-year-old Macallan. "The board is losing their collective minds," Sloane said, her eyes fixed on her buzzing phone. A rare, genuine smirk played on her lips. "Fletcher just tried to call an emergency vote to oust me, only to be informed by my legal counsel that I am officially married. The succession clause is fulfilled. My shares are locked in." "Congratulations, CEO Carmichael," I said, handing her a crystal tumbler. "To our mutual benefit," she replied, clinking her glass against mine. "Now, husband, you promised me a blueprint to dismantle the Davenport empire. The board is handled. Show me your worth." I walked over to the massive dining table where I had spread out several charts and documents I had spent the last week compiling. "Let's start with the Horizon Tech acquisition." Sloane frowned, setting her drink down. "My analyst project Horizon's patents will dominate the mobile interface market for the next decade. It's a solid buy." "In this timeline, maybe," I muttered under my breath, shaking off the ghosts of my past life. I pointed to a seemingly insignificant subsidiary listed under Horizon's parent company. "Look deeper. Horizon's core patents were stolen from a startup in Shenzhen 2 years ago. The original creators have been quietly building a massive, airtight intellectual property lawsuit. It's sealed in an overseas court right now, but it will go public in exactly 18 days. Sloane's icy blue eyes widened slightly. "If Vanguard acquires them now, you inherit a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit. The patents become instantly void, and Vanguard's stock tanks by 30%. I finished for her. The men on your board will use the disaster to finally force you out for negligence." She stared at the paperwork, her brilliant mind working at 1,000,000 miles an hour. "How do you know this, Asher? My private investigators didn't even flag this." Because Ryland Davenport has a spy inside Vanguard, I lied smoothly, knowing I couldn't exactly tell her I lived through this disaster 3 years in the future. "I saw the memo on his desk before he kicked me out. He was waiting for you to buy Horizon so he could leak the lawsuit himself and swoop in to buy Vanguard's distressed assets." Sloane's expression hardened into a mask of pure, lethal fury. "Ryland thought he could play me. He thought he was untouchable," I corrected. "So, here is how we hit back. You pull out of the Horizon deal today, citing internal restructuring due to your sudden marriage. Let the rumors fly that you're distracted. Meanwhile, we quietly funnel the acquisition capital into buying Aegis Logistics." "Aegis?" Sloane scoffed. "They're a mid-level shipping and warehousing conglomerate." "Why would I want trucks and sheds?" "Because," I said, leaning over the table, my heart pounding with the thrill of the hunt, "Trent Davenport, my dear, fake brother is currently spearheading the Davenport family's massive expansion into e-commerce. It's his pet project to prove to my father that he's a capable heir, and his entire supply chain relies on leasing warehouse space from Aegis Logistics. They are finalizing a 10-year exclusivity contract next week." Comprehension dawned on Sloane's face. The anger vanished, replaced by a shark-like grin. If Vanguard owns Aegis before Trent signs that contract, we control the Davenport supply lines, I finished. We can squeeze them until they bleed. We hike the lease rates by 400% or we deny them space entirely. Trent's flagship project will collapse before it even launches, costing my father hundreds of millions and humiliating his new golden boy. Sloane looked at me, a newfound respect glittering in her gaze. You really are a viper, Asher. I learned from the best, I whispered, thinking of my sisters watching me die in the rain. Make the call, Sloane. Let's buy some warehouses. Stepping onto the red carpet at the Metropolitan Business Council, Gala felt like stepping onto a battlefield. It had been 4 weeks since my wedding. Vanguard had silently acquired Aegis Logistics through 3 different shell companies. Trent's e-commerce launch was scheduled for tomorrow morning. The trap was set, the jaws wide open, waiting for the imposter to step inside. Flashbulbs erupted like gunfire as Sloane and I exited the Maybach. I adjusted the cuffs of my bespoke charcoal tuxedo, feeling the heavy weight of the platinum wedding band on my finger. Sloane slipped her arm through mine, her emerald green silk gown catching the light and turning every head on the street. We were the most dangerous, talked-about couple in New York, the disgraced heir who married the Ice Queen. As we walked into the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, the chatter instantly died down. A sea of billionaires, politicians, and socialites parted for us. And there, standing by the champagne tower, was the Davenport family. My father, Rylan, looked visibly older, his jaw clenched tight as he glared at me. My sisters were clustered together, dripping in diamonds paid for by the company I was about to gut. Emma, Abigail, and Natalie stared at me with a mixture of hostility and undeniable shock. They had expected me to vanish into poverty. Instead, I had returned as a king alongside a queen. And then there was Trent. He stood in the center wearing a gaudy maroon velvet dinner jacket, looking flushed and overly confident. Clinging to his arm was Stella, wearing the exact same smile she used to reserve for me. But as her eyes met mine, her smile faltered. She took in my tailored suit, the confident posture, and the impossibly beautiful billionaire on my arm. A flash of profound regret crossed her face before she quickly masked it. "Showtime," Sloane murmured perfectly in my ear, squeezing my arm. We didn't walk away. We walked directly toward them. "Well, well," Trent sneered loudly as we approached, making sure the surrounding guests could hear, "if it isn't the prodigal parasite." I must admit, Asher, I didn't think you'd sink to becoming a glorified gigolo so quickly. How much is your allowance? A collective gasp rippled through the nearby eavesdroppers. My father didn't reprimand him. Emma and Abigail smirked. They still thought they held all the cards. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, a cold, empty expression that made Trent's sneer falter slightly. "Trent," I said smoothly, letting my eyes rake over his velvet jacket with mild disgust. "Still dressing like a Las Vegas magician, I see. Some things even stolen money can't buy." Trent's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "You watch your mouth, you penniless fraud. You have no right to be here. This is an event for actual businessmen, not charity cases hiding behind their wives." Sloane stepped forward, her presence instantly dominating the space. She looked Trent up and down as if he were a particularly unpleasant stain on the carpet. "Mr. Davenport," Sloane said, her voice dripping with absolute zero frost, "my husband does not hide behind me. He stands beside me. And as for your assertion about..." The smirk vanished from Trent's face. My father stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about, Sloane? Keep your corporate games out of this. Trent's e-commerce launch tomorrow is airtight." "Is it?" I asked, pulling a folded piece of paper from my breast pocket. It was a formal notice of ownership transfer. "I believe you were scheduled to sign a 10-year lease agreement with Aegis Logistics tomorrow morning at 9, Trent. To secure the 12 regional distribution centers, your new platform absolutely requires to function." Trent swallowed hard, a bead of sweat breaking out on his forehead. So what? The contracts are drafted. The terms are locked. The terms were negotiated with the previous owners, I corrected, handing the paper to my father. Ryland snatched it, his eyes darting across the legal text, his face drained of all color. Vanguard bought Aegis yesterday, I said, raising my voice just enough so the surrounding elite could hear the Davenport Golden Boy getting publicly slaughtered. And as the newly appointed head of Vanguard's acquisitions division, I've reviewed your proposed lease. It's severely undervalued. So, I've decided to terminate the negotiations. You can't do that, Trent shouted, losing his composed veneer. The velvet jacket suddenly looked too tight on him. We launch tomorrow. We have millions of dollars of inventory sitting on docks waiting to move into those warehouses. If we don't have that space, the launch fails, the stock plummets. I know exactly what happens. I cut him off, my voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. You lose my father $200 million on your very first solo project. You prove to everyone in this room that you are nothing but an incompetent amateur playing dress-up in my old life. Asher, enough, Emma snapped, stepping forward, her eyes flashing with anger. How could you be so vindictive? He's your brother. He is a stranger who forged a DNA test, Emma, I said, locking eyes with my oldest sister. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. And you all threw me to the wolves without a second thought. I'm not being vindictive. I'm just doing business. Stella let go of Trent's arm, stepping slightly away from him as he began to hyperventilate. Dad, do something, Trent pleaded, looking at Rylan with wide, panicked eyes. Call the lawyers. Sue them. On what grounds, you idiot? Rylan hissed through gritted teeth, glaring at Trent with a look of pure, unadulterated disappointment. A look he used to reserve only for me. They bought the company legally. You didn't secure the space in time. You failed. Hearing my father say those words to Trent was sweeter than any revenge I could have imagined. Trent shrank back, his bravado entirely shattered. I turned back to Sloane, offering her my arm. Shall we go get a drink, darling? The air over here is suddenly reeking of desperation. Let's, Sloane agreed, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. As we walked away, leaving the Davenports in a stunned, humiliated silence, I glanced back over my shoulder. Abigail was staring at Trent, her sharp eyes calculating, assessing the damage. The blind loyalty my sisters had for the real heir was beginning to fracture. The first domino had fallen, and I wasn't going to stop until the entire house was crushed into dust. Morning arrived with the sweet scent of corporate bloodshed. Sitting across from Sloane in the Vanguard executive boardroom, I watched the financial ticker at the bottom of the wall-mounted television screen. Davenport Holdings was bleeding out, down 14% before noon. Trent's spectacular failure to launch the e-commerce platform the previous day had triggered a massive panic sell-off among their institutional investors. Millions of dollars of perishable and high-value inventory were currently sitting on shipping docks, rotting in the sun, because Vanguard now owned the Aegis warehouses, and we had officially denied them entry. Your father's board of directors just called an emergency meeting, Sloane noted, her eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction over the rim of her porcelain coffee cup. Rumor has it they are demanding Trent step down as VP of Development. In less than 24 hours, you've turned their golden boy into a massive liability. It's only the beginning, I replied, leaning back in the plush leather chair. Trent is a cornered rat now. And cornered rats make stupid, desperate mistakes when they need an escape route. Right on cue, my encrypted phone buzzed on the mahogany table. The caller ID flashed a name that made me smile. Thomas Gale. He was the private investigator I had hired in my previous life to uncover Trent's forged DNA test. In this timeline, I had hired him on day one, backed by Sloane's limitless bank accounts, with a very specific set of instructions. Put him on speaker, Sloane commanded gently. I tapped the screen. Tell me you have good news, Gale. "Better than good, Mr. Carmichael Davenport," Gail's raspy voice crackled through the speaker. "I dug into the financial anomalies you flagged regarding your sister's offshore trust accounts. You were right on the money. Trent isn't just failing at business. He's actively hemorrhaging cash to cover up his past." "Explain," I said, leaning forward. Before Trent magically became the Davenport heir, he was running a string of bad debts in Reno under the name Brian Davies. He owes some very dangerous, very private creditors a lot of money. When the e-commerce launch collapsed yesterday, Trent's personal margin accounts got called in. He panicked. Last night, at roughly 2 a.m., he bypassed the secondary authentication protocols on the family's private banking server. Sloan raised an elegant eyebrow. He stole from his own family? To the tune of $4.5 million, Gail confirmed. He siphoned it directly from the liquid assets in Abigail and Emma's personal trust funds. He tried to mask it as a routine quarterly tax reallocation, but he's sloppy. I have the digital ledger, the IP addresses, and the wire transfer receipts routing the money to a shell corporation in the Caymans. A cold, dark thrill washed over me. "Send the encrypted files to my secure server immediately, Gail. Your bonus will be wired by 5 o'clock. I ended the call and looked at my wife. Sloan was already smiling, a dangerous, beautiful expression that I was quickly learning to love. "Emma and Abigail," Sloan mused, swirling her coffee, "the two eldest, the most fiercely protective of him. What's your play, Asher?" "Abigail is a corporate shark," I said, standing up and buttoning my suit jacket. "She's ruthless, and she taught me everything I know about forensic accounting. She tolerated my exile because she believed Trent was better for the company's bottom line. But if there is one thing Abigail Davenport hates more than failure, it's a thief stealing her own money." 2 hours later, I walked into Le Bernardin. The midday lunch rush was in full swing, populated by the city's most elite power brokers. I spotted Abigail sitting alone in a secluded corner booth, aggressively tapping away on her iPad, a half-eaten salad ignored beside her. She looked stressed, the dark circles under her eyes a testament to the nightmare Trent had caused the company's stock. I slid into the booth across from her without an invitation. Abigail jumped, her sharp eyes flashing with immediate hostility when she saw my face. "Asher, I don't recall putting you on my schedule. Get out of my booth before I have security throw you onto the street." "You could try," I said smoothly, signaling a waiter for a glass of sparkling water. "But considering Vanguard just became the majority debt holder for Davenport Holdings' West Coast expansion, I doubt the manager would oblige you. Hello, Abigail." She clenched her jaw, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her iPad. "If you're here to gloat about the Aegis Logistics ambush, save it. You played a dirty trick." Trent was blindsided. Trent was incompetent. I corrected her softly. "But I'm not here to talk about his business failures. I'm here to talk about his criminal ones." I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a sleek black iPad Pro, and slid it across the white tablecloth. The screen was loaded with Gail's forensic reports. "What is this?" she demanded, refusing to touch it. "That is a heavily documented, undeniable trail of digital breadcrumbs," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Showing exactly how your beloved biological brother spent his morning. Specifically, how he forged your digital signature and drained $2.2 million from your private Cayman trust." Abigail froze. The hostility in her eyes fractured, replaced by a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. "You're lying. The trusts require dual-factor authorization, which he bypassed using the master administrative keys Dad gave him last month," I countered. "Look at the IP address, Abigail. It traces back to the primary router in the Davenport estate study. The transfer happened at 2:14 a.m. I know for a fact you were in a conference call with the Tokyo branch at that exact time." Slowly, with a trembling hand, Abigail reached out and pulled the tablet toward her. I sat back and watched as the smartest of my 6 sisters read through the undeniable proof of her own betrayal. Her eyes darted back and forth across the screen, her breathing growing shallow. She knew accounting better than anyone. She knew I wasn't faking the data. He stole from me, she whispered, her voice devoid of its usual icy command. She looked up at me, looking younger and more vulnerable than I had seen her in years. Why? Because he's drowning in debt from his days as a Reno conman, I said, delivering the final, crushing blow. And because he doesn't love you, Abigail. He loves the lifestyle you provide him. You all threw me away for a parasite. And now, he's feeding on you. I stood up, leaving the tablet on the table. I suggest you check Emma's accounts too. Have a lovely lunch, sister. As I walked out of the restaurant, I knew the poison was planted. The unbreakable bond of the Davenport sisters had just suffered its first fatal crack. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Vanguard Gala Room later that week. Sloan was hosting a high-profile charity auction, an event practically mandated for the city's billionaires. The guest list was carefully curated, but I had intentionally ensured a few specific invitations were extended to the Davenports. I wanted them to see my new empire. I wanted them to choke on it. I stood by the grand staircase, nursing a bourbon, watching the room. The atmosphere was electric, Vanguard was ascending, and Davenport Holdings was on the brink of a downgrade by Moody's. Across the room, standing near a display of modern art, was Stella. She looked entirely out of place. Her champagne-colored gown was beautiful, but her posture was rigid, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Trent was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding from the board members who were out for his blood. In my past life, Stella had been the anchor that kept me sane. When the DNA results came out, she had held me, stroked my hair, and told me we would survive it together. A month later, she left a voicemail breaking off the engagement, citing irreconcilable social differences, and was photographed on Trent's arm the very next day. Watching her step over my bleeding body in the alleyway was the final image burned into my dying brain. As I watched her now, I felt nothing but a hollow, freezing contempt. She caught my eye. A desperate, hopeful expression flickered across her face. She set her champagne flute down on a passing waiter's tray and began to weave through the crowd toward me. Asher, she breathed as she approached, stopping just inches away. She looked up at me through her thick lashes, deploying the same doe-eyed look that used to make my heart skip a beat. You look incredible. Stella, I replied, my voice perfectly flat. I'm surprised you showed up. Without Trent here to buy your auction paddles, I imagine you're quite bored. She winced, a flash of genuine pain crossing her features. Don't be like that, please. You have to know how hard these past few weeks have been for me. Hard for you? I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Your fiancé lost the family $200 million and is currently under investigation by his own board. Yes, I imagine hitching your wagon to a sinking ship is quite stressful. I didn't want to do it, Asher, she suddenly pleaded, her voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. She reached out, her manicured fingers brushing the sleeve of my tuxedo. Your father, Rylan forced me. He told me that if I didn't break our engagement and publicly support Trent, he would ruin my family's real estate firm. I had to protect my parents. I never stopped loving you. I stared at her, marveling at the audacity. She was a phenomenal actress. If I hadn't died in that alleyway, if I hadn't seen the flat, dead look in her eyes as she told Trent to leave me bleeding in the rain, I might have actually believed her. That's a beautiful story, Stella, I said softly, leaning in closer. She mistakenly took it as a sign of affection, her eyes fluttering shut for a moment. It really is. It paints you as a tragic victim of circumstance, a martyr for your family. It's the truth, she whispered, leaning into my space. This marriage to Sloan, I know it's fake, Asher. Everyone knows it's just a business arrangement. We can fix this. You're powerful now. You can protect me from Rylan. We can be together. You want me to protect you? I repeated, the taste of ashes in my mouth. I took a step back, breaking the physical contact completely. The warmth drained from my face, replaced by a mask of pure glacial rage. "You didn't break our engagement to save your family, Stella," I said, my voice loud enough to carry over the ambient chatter, causing several nearby guests to turn their heads. "You broke it because you are a social parasite. You saw my bank accounts freeze, and you immediately latched on to the nearest host with a black card. You don't love me. You love the fact that I just bought half of Manhattan, and you're terrified that Trent is about to be indicted for embezzlement." Stella's face drained of all color. "Asher, keep your voice down." "No," I interrupted, my tone slicing through the air like a scalpel. "You made your choice the day I was thrown out. You stood in my father's foyer and watched me walk away with nothing. You don't get to crawl back now that I'm wearing the crown. Is there a problem here, darling?" Sloane materialized at my side, slipping her arm seamlessly through mine. She looked breathtaking in a sleek, obsidian gown, diamonds glittering at her throat. She looked at Stella with the kind of detached amusement one might reserve for a particularly slow child. Stella swallowed hard, shrinking back from Sloane's overwhelming presence. "No problem, Miss Carmichael. Asher and I were just catching up. It's Mrs. Carmichael Davenport," Sloane corrected smoothly, her icy blue eyes pinning Stella to the spot. "And I would appreciate it if you refrained from cornering my husband. He has a very low tolerance for people who beg. It's so painfully unseemly." A few chuckles erupted from the eavesdropping socialites nearby. Stella's cheeks burned crimson. She looked at me one last time, searching for a shred of the boy who used to adore her. She found a monster instead. Tears welled in her eyes as she spun on her heel, fleeing toward the coat check, utterly humiliated. "Well," Sloane murmured, resting her head lightly against my shoulder as we watched her run. "That was delightfully vicious. Remind me never to cross you, husband." "Just cleaning housewife," I replied, taking a slow sip of my bourbon. 2 down, 6 Davenports left to go. By Friday morning, the Bloomberg terminal on Sloane's desk looked like a crime scene. Davenport Holdings' stock price was a sheer, terrifying red cliff diving into nothingness. The poison I had planted with Abigail at Le Bernardin had worked faster than even I anticipated. Abigail, ruthless and pragmatic, hadn't just checked Emma's accounts. She had audited the entire family trust. What she found was a financial massacre. Trent hadn't just stolen the $2.2 million. He had leveraged the twins, Mia and Lily's, college endowments to secure off-book loans for his Reno creditors, and he had completely liquidated Natalie's gallery funding to pay off the interest. The golden child had financially eviscerated his own siblings in less than 30 days. Sloane stood by the window of our penthouse, looking out over the Manhattan skyline, a steaming cup of Earl Grey in her hand. My inside contacts at the SEC just tipped me off. Abigail formally filed a whistleblower report against Trent at 6 a.m. today. Wire fraud, embezzlement, and forging the signature of a corporate officer. I smiled, nodding my dark crimson tie in the reflection of the mirror. She threw him to the wolves to save herself, exactly as she was trained to do. "Rylan is trying to contain it," Sloane added, turning to look at me, her blue eyes sharp and assessing. "He's calling emergency meetings with the board, trying to use his personal shares to cover the deficit. But Vanguard holds the debt from the Aegis Logistics failure. If we call in that loan today, Rylan's personal liquidity drops to 0. He'll be forced into Chapter 11 bankruptcy by Monday." "Then let's call it in," I said softly. Sloane's lips curved into that beautiful, dangerous smile. I already did. The foreclosure notices on the Davenport estate and their corporate headquarters were dispatched via courier 20 minutes ago. Shall we go watch the castle fall? The drive to the Davenport estate in the Hamptons took just under 2 hours. The rain from the previous night had cleared, leaving the sky a crisp, mocking, perfect blue. As the Maybach pulled up to the towering wrought iron gates of my former home, I felt a strange sense of absolute calm. 3 years ago, I had been chased out of these gates in the dead of night, broken and penniless. Today, I owned the gates. We didn't even need to ring the buzzer. 3 black SEC sedans and 2 local police cruisers were already parked haphazardly on the pristine circular driveway. The heavy oak front doors were wide open. Sloan and I stepped out, the gravel crunching under our shoes. We walked into the grand foyer, the exact spot where my father had disowned me. It was absolute chaos. Trent was backed against the sweeping marble staircase, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat. 2 federal agents were in the process of reading him his rights, slapping heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. "I didn't do it! It's a setup!" Trent shrieked, his voice cracking as he looked desperately toward my father. "Dad, tell them. Tell them Asher planted those files. He hacked the server." Ryland Davenport stood near the fireplace, looking like he had aged 20 years in the span of a single morning. His face was ashen, his hands trembling as he clutched a stack of legal documents, our foreclosure notices. He didn't even look at Trent. He was staring blankly at the Vanguard letterhead. My sisters were huddled together near the entrance to the drawing room. Natalie was openly weeping, her dreams of an art gallery shattered. Mia and Lily looked entirely shell-shocked. Emma, the eldest, was screaming at the federal agents, demanding they unhand her brother, while Abigail stood slightly apart, her arms crossed tight against her chest, her face a mask of cold, terrified self-preservation. She had pulled the trigger, but she hadn't expected the explosion to be this massive. Asher, Sophia, the youngest, was the first to see me. Her voice, small and trembling, cut through the shouting. The entire room froze. Every head turned toward the foyer. I stood there, immaculate in my tailored suit, with Sloan Carmichael, the most powerful woman in New York, standing at my side. "What are you doing here?" Emma hissed, taking a step toward me, her eyes blazing with irrational fury. "Did you come to gloat? Did you do this? Did you frame him?" "Frame him?" I asked smoothly, stepping further into the light. "Emma, Trent bypassed the dual-factor authentication using Ryland's IP address. I couldn't have framed him if I tried. He stole from you, all of you, because he's not a Davenport. He's a con artist named Brian Davies who owed the wrong people a lot of money." "That's a lie," Trent screamed, struggling against the agents. "Is it?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small manila folder. I tossed it onto the glass coffee table. It landed exactly where the fake DNA results had landed a month ago. That is the real DNA test, conducted by Thomas Gale, a licensed private investigator. It proves, without a shadow of a doubt, that Trent bribed a lab technician at Cedars-Sinai to alter the records. Silence descended on the room, thick and suffocating. Ryland slowly lowered the foreclosure documents. He looked at the folder, then at me, and finally at Trent. The devastating realization washed over him. He had traded his loyal son for a viper. "It's true, isn't it?" Ryland whispered, his voice completely broken. You aren't my blood." "Dad, don't listen to him." "Shut up!" Ryland roared, the sudden volume making everyone flinch. He looked at Trent with a disgust so profound it made my own chest ache with a phantom memory of pain. "Get him out of my house, take him away." As the agents dragged a screaming, sobbing Trent out the front doors, the reality of their situation began to sink into the sisters. Abigail walked slowly over to the coffee table and picked up the Vanguard notices Ryland had dropped. Her eyes widened as she read the terms. "Dad," Abigail's voice trembled. "These are margin calls from Vanguard, the Aegis debt. It triggered a default clause on the estate. They're seizing the house. They're seizing the company." Emma gasped, covering her mouth. Natalie let out a choked sob. Ryland finally looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "You planned this. From the moment you left, you used Sloan to dismantle me." "I merely provided the capital," Sloan interjected, her voice perfectly polite but laced with razor blades. "Your own greed and your blind faith in a criminal dismantled you, Ryland. Vanguard is just collecting the pieces." The auctioning of Davenport Holdings took less than a month. Without Trent's stolen funds, and with the company's stock trading at pennies, Rylan had no choice but to liquidate everything to avoid federal prison for gross corporate negligence. Vanguard acquired the Davenport real estate portfolio, their tech divisions, and their overseas assets for a fraction of their worth. I stood in the empty grand ballroom of what used to be the Davenport corporate headquarters. The Vanguard logo was already being installed on the frosted glass doors. Footsteps echoed in the cavernous room. I turned to see my 6 sisters walking slowly toward me. They looked nothing like the untouchable socialites they had been. Emma's designer clothes looked slightly rumpled. Abigail lacked her usual fierce corporate makeup. Sophia looked small and deeply exhausted. They had lost their trust funds, their status, and their home. They were currently living in a rented townhouse in Brooklyn, courtesy of whatever meager savings Abigail had managed to hide from Trent. They stopped a few feet away from me. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Asher, Emma finally broke the silence. Her voice was thick with unshed tears. She took a hesitant step forward, reaching out a hand. Please, we know everything now. The lawyers confirmed the DNA test. We know you were telling the truth. We are so sorry. We were blind, Lily added, tears spilling down her cheeks. He manipulated us. Dad manipulated us. But you're our brother, Asher. You always were. We miss you, Sophia whispered, looking up at me with those wide, innocent eyes that used to melt my heart. Please come home. I looked at them. 6 women whom I had loved more than my own life. 6 women who had watched me bleed to death in an alleyway in a timeline they would never remember. Home? I asked, my voice calm, flat, and devoid of any warmth. Where is that exactly? Because the Davenport estate belongs to Vanguard now, and I live in a penthouse overlooking the park with my wife. Don't do this, Asher, Abigail pleaded, stepping forward. You won. You destroyed him. You took the company. You proved your point, but we're still family. You can't just throw us away. That is exactly what I can do, I replied, my voice turning to ice. I looked at each of them, meeting their desperate eyes. You didn't love me, Emma. You loved the convenience of me. The moment Dad pointed a finger and told you I wasn't blood, you discarded 22 years of memories like trash. You didn't even hesitate. We were confused. You were cruel, I corrected her sharply. Trent didn't manipulate you into treating me like garbage. You chose to do that. You chose to let me walk out that door with nothing. You chose to sneer at me at galas. The only reason you are standing here apologizing is because I now hold the deed to your lives, and Trent is facing 20 years in federal lockup. Emma flinched as if I had struck her. Natalie buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I don't hate you, I said, and to my surprise, I realized it was the absolute truth. The blinding rage that had brought me back to life was gone, replaced by a profound, unshakable indifference. I just don't care about you anymore. You are strangers to me. Do not contact me again. I turned my back on them and walked toward the exit. Asher, please, Emma cried out, her voice breaking. You can't leave us like this. I didn't stop. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, leaving the echoes of their weeping behind me. Outside, the Maybach was idling at the curb. Sloane was sitting in the back, typing on her tablet. She looked up as I slid into the leather seat beside her. Finished? She asked softly, reading the lingering tension in my jaw. Finished, I confirmed, letting out a long, shuddering breath. The heavy weight I had carried since the night in the alleyway finally lifted from my chest. Sloane set her tablet aside. She reached out, her cool, elegant fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw before resting on my cheek. Over the past few months, our marriage of convenience had slowly morphed into a partnership of deep, unspoken respect, and lately, into something fiercely genuine. The Ice Queen had thawed, but only for me. Vanguard stock is up 20% this morning, Sloane murmured, leaning in close, her lips brushing against my ear. The board is entirely terrified of both of us. The city is ours." "Then let's go celebrate, Mrs. Carmichael Davenport," I said, turning my head to capture her lips in a kiss that tasted of power, victory, and a brand new life. I had been dragged down into the dark, but I didn't die there. I had been reborn into a king, and I had built my throne on the ashes of those who betrayed me. And that is how the Davenport Empire fell, not by a rival's hand, but by the very son they threw away. Asher's journey from a discarded, bleeding outcast in an alleyway to the ultimate architect of his family's ruin proves that karma doesn't always wait for the next life. Sometimes, you have to seize it yourself. Trent's lies caught up to him, Stella's greed left her with nothing, and the 6 sisters who chose a fake heir over real loyalty were left to drown in the ashes of their own making. Meanwhile, Asher found true power and unexpected love with Sloane Carmichael, ruling the city they conquered together.